Counselor Accents Podcast. Two school counselors who love their jobs. Oh, and they happen to have Southern accents too. Bless their hearts.
I'm Laura Rankhorn.
And I'm Kim Crumley. And together we are
Counselor Accents.
I was swallowing my graham cracker. Graham crackers are a gift to the world.
You think so? I mean, maybe if you're in children's church and you're 5.
Well, that explains my love for animal crackers or those vanilla wafers.
And you make fun of my food choices.
Well, it's strange to me that literally when you say that, if I am in Bible school or with the nursery, there is nothing better than a vanilla wafer. I don't know why I want to eat those things when those kids are eating them. It's not something I would pick up literally at the grocery store, but I want to steal those from those children. I don't know why.
In the past, when I've kept the nursery and it's snack time, it's like I cannot get food fast enough. So I think that working with the children in the nursery or children's church, maybe it drains you. I don't know. But the Cheez-Its have never tasted better than when I work in the nursery. So I'll give you that.
That could be why I gained 20 pounds when I taught kindergarten. You just have got to energize yourself at all times.
I can't imagine.
Well,
I can't help but notice your casual Friday wear.
Casual Friday wear. I am wearing I'll stand up for my listeners. It's a Panthers t-shirt with little hands with hearts on them. And it says Panthers making a difference. This was my advisory t-shirt that I bought for my advisory members this year. I get them a t-shirt every year. And that was kind of our theme this year, was making a difference in other people's lives. And that was what we worked toward, is giving students an opportunity to help other people. And so it was a successful year, and we've already started up for next year. We met yesterday and with my advisory committee, and one of the things that we had decided to do was a back to school bash. And so there will be free haircuts and shoe vouchers and school supplies and all that kind of stuff. So it's the advisory committee is working on a big back to school bash with the whole deal. Like, we got a big music group coming, and they're making it really big. So you get the right people on your advisory committee and they will go big.
You are the prime example of how to do an advisory council.
Well, I definitely use them to benefit my program and the school, but they take care of a lot of the needs that the students have, especially going back to school. And this year, especially with, food prices and haircut, everything is more. So that's going to be a big help to parents and teachers, because teachers will get the supplies that they need. And then if they're, might get other things that they need from the parents. So I'm excited about it. Yeah, it's worth a t-shirt. It is worth a t-shirt.
That is not what we're talking about today. So enough of that.
Enough of you, Kim.
I would like for you to tell our listeners about our guest today. This is someone that you met, so set it up for us.
So, Laura, I told you about Dr. Hendershott, when I came back from Savannah at the National Youth at Risk Conference. And he was the last. In fact, I was leaving and I was told, no, you want to hear him speak. He had been the keynote speaker before, and somebody that was supposed to speak couldn't. And so they had him come in. So I went in, and this is where we call it a fresh word. It was just wording things in a way that made you see differently. And I feel like that's very rare, but it's powerful. And when that happens, I feel like you're getting that nugget, that gold nugget of, he calls it a paradigm shift, and it really is. So Joe, along with Darty, his wife, have Warriors of Hope. And he is going to give us just a little taste of his book, Hope for the Wounded. And you'll see what I mean as you listen, as I talk, and we'll talk about it later. But as you listen to this, Laura, because you've not got to hear him, you'll realize when I say that what he calls the paradigm shift, how we see students, and gives us just a little taste of his book, Hope for the Wounded. So I think you are really going to enjoy this very short session, but it makes me want to dig in more with what Dr. Hendershott has to say.
All right, I'm excited.
Laura, you are in for a treat. I think you have heard me speak highly of Dr. Hendershott, who he has allowed me to call him Joe.
Okay.
Please.
I don't know if you have permission to call him Joe, but we know each other and you don't
Okay.
know him. So,
All right. Maybe
But
by the end of
anyway.
this, I will have earned that right as well.
I'll
Yeah.
tell you. So I met Dr. Hendershott. Actually, I met his wife, Darty, who is a live wire. And so I met her. We just kind of struck up a conversation, and she is just gorgeous and full of this life and energy and just going, and she said, you've got to hear my husband, because in what I was saying, she said, I think it's really good. This message is going to resonate with you. And so I went in there and I was so glad that I did. And I'm so excited for our listeners to get to hear your message. Dr. Hendershott, tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're at. And then we want to hear a little bit about, I want you to tell the story of kind of how the words wounded came about, or your thoughts on that. That meant so much to me. I think I sat there and cried when I heard you speak. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I consider it an honor, and I'm humbled that you would ask me to be a part of your podcast here today. So thank you. Well, I guess first thing I would talk about my background, because I talk about the difference between at-risk and wounded. And I guess my background, I was a high school principal, assistant principal, inner city schools, urban schools, rural schools. Did that for about 5 or 6 years, and really found my passion, my calling, working with what we normally call at-risk youth. I started getting into alternative education. Then I worked 6 years in a juvenile lockup facility as a teacher. Then I became a recreational therapist at Boys Village, which is a residential treatment center. And then I became principal of Boys Village School. So really found my passion, my calling, I guess, if you want to call it that, working with what we would normally call at-risk youth. And so I guess that's my professional background. That's where I'm coming from on the topic of at-risk and wounded. Darty's probably told you that we have 9 kids. We've had, I think, 9 foster children, and we've adopted through foster care and international adoptions. And so anyways, we have the stuff we're talking about isn't stuff we're just saying to the teachers and the educators out there. Hey, we hope you get this message, and we hope that you can apply the principles that we talk about. As parents, we have to work with it every day ourselves, because our kids come from wounded backgrounds. So I guess to answer your question, you want me to explain the difference between at-risk and wounded?
Yeah, I loved the story of you spoke on at risk, and you had this amount show up, and you changed that wording and what that did.
Yeah, well, what happened was I was working at these places, and they would send me to at-risk conferences, and they would say, go get these strategies to work with these at-risk kids in these detention centers, lockup facilities, alternative schools. And so I would go to the conferences and I would get information. I would come back and I would apply the principles I was learning. And I just really wasn't very successful at it. I felt I had a passion to work with them. I kind of came from that background myself. I don't know we'll have time to get into that or not, but I came from that background. My father fought some addictions, and our family split up and lived with my aunt and uncle. And so I kind of came from that what you would call at risk, people call it at risk background, maybe. So I think that's maybe why I gravitated towards working in those settings. But I would go and I would get these messages, and I'd come back, and the stuff I was trying that I would learn at these at-risk conferences and read these at-risk books really wasn't working. Until one day our son was hurt very bad in an accident at our house. And in the accident, a police officer pulled over my wife, who was rushing our son to the hospital for first critical care. And he was pulled out the rule book about, about speeding, about, being careful, about fines, about losing your license. But in the middle of going through all of these rules, he looked in the back seat and saw my son, who was not an at-risk child. My son wasn't at risk of being hurt. I said my son had already been harmed. He was in need of critical care. He was wounded. And so the police officer put this rule book away, and he had a first care responder training over here that he escorted my wife and son to the hospital. Now, his job wasn't to sew my son back together, to be a surgeon, to do anything professionally on that level. His job was simply to be a first care responder, to stop the bleeding and get my son and wife to the experts for help. Now, I tell people, what would have happened if he would say stuck on the rules or on the at risk? My son wasn't at risk. He was wounded. And the police officer recognized that. And so I kind of thought, well, my wife told me the story, and I thought, maybe that's it. Maybe that's what I'm missing working with the kids I'm working with, is I'm trying to prevent things from happening in their lives. But the majority of kids I'm working with, it's already happened. They weren't at risk. They were beyond at risk. So, I know I'm supposed to say something scholarly here, but there's nothing really scholarly about it. So when people ask me the difference between at-risk and wounded, I say a wounded kid is just a kid beyond at risk. And I do believe we have at-risk children, and I believe at-risk principles for at-risk children are a good thing. But I started in 2006 talking about wounded kids at a conference. They invited me to speak on at-risk kids, and I said, I'll do one on at-risk kids if you let me do one on wounded kids. And they said, that sounds interesting. What will you talk about? And I said, I'm not real sure. I just want to know if anybody else in the country thinks that we have kids beyond that risk that are wounded, or if it's just me and my own thoughts. So I went to the conference, and I had a session scheduled for at-risk kids and a session in the afternoon scheduled for wounded kids. I went to the conference, and they said, we have a problem. And I said, what's the problem? They said, we have over 800 people signed up for your wounded student session. Now, just to keep my ego in check, we had 17 people signed up for my at-risk session.
Wow.
Same day, same presenter, same conference. I had my answer. Teachers, it resonated. I had no business model, business plan, want to be a presenter, didn't want to be a writer, didn't want to research it. I just wanted the one simple, in 2006, question that I had in my mind as an educator: does anybody really think we have kids that are beyond that risk that are wounded? And it came to find out that I started looking at my training that I received in my bachelor's degree, my master's degree, in my PhD work. And what I really found out was that we didn't really spend one semester, 1 month, 1 week, 1 hour, 1 second talking about kids beyond that risk. And the research in 2006, when I started talking about it, said 25% of our kids were dealing with trauma. And so I calculated that. I had a school of 3,000 kids. I thought 25%, that's 750 of my kids are running around my school with trauma. It was news to me, so I had to revamp the way I developed my school culture, use my counselors, that were doing testing and scheduling, which is important work. But I had to find other people to do scheduling and testing to free up my counselors to do counseling so they could get to the kids who really needed help, to be first care responders and get them to the help, for lack of a better term. Told my school board I didn't want to go to any more principal conferences. I didn't want to go to any more school conferences on curriculum because I knew all that stuff. I mean, I already knew it. And they said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I need to start going to counseling conferences. I need to start hanging out with people like you. You know, I need to start knowing what you knew, what I didn't learn in my master's and my EDD or my master's or in my bachelor's. So I just hung out, and then we became foster adoptive parents and started getting more experience working with therapists and counselors. And I started saying, wow, I should have had this information as an educator. So I realized there wasn't a lot of research. There was a lot of research on at-risk kids, but not a lot about kids beyond that risk. And the research then, and 10 years later, I did my doctoral research on this, said that 47.9% of our kids were dealing with trauma, which was around 35 million kids. And I thought, how many of our teachers really know how to work with kids that are dealing with trauma? And I poll teachers when I go to the schools or do presentations. And what I normally find out is that about 95% of and these are average numbers that I get, about 95% of our teachers say that they feel like they're first care responders. About 90-some% feel like they're not prepared to deal with it. And so how do we get that training to our teachers out there to deal with the trauma and, you know, what the last 2 years has brought us, plus maybe 2.5 years plus, do we have more than 47.9% of our kids, after what we've been through the past couple of years, and our teachers getting training on how to deal with these kids' trauma. So that's kind of the basis behind what I do. And I know I just learned from kids. I learned from teachers. I learned from counselors. I learned from basically, I kept my ears open through a different lens on where my kids were coming from, which led me to do my dissertation on empathy and education. That our kids today say, "Do you feel me?" As the kind of people, we pass that off as slang. And a definition of empathy is to feel what someone else feels. So I think our kids today are saying, "Do you feel me?" Because they're saying, kids say, counselors taught me to ask what questions and not why questions. And when I would ask kids what happened, or what happened to them, or what landed them where they were at, they would tell me their story and they would say, "Do you feel me?" And what they're basically saying is, can I have your empathy? Can you share in my pain? Can you feel what I feel? So that's kind of taken it from point A to point Z, and there's a lot of in between that story.
Yeah. It's a powerful story though. And it's, when something is fresh, we call it a fresh word. And I feel like that is when you took that at risk and changed that wording to wounded, it just is such a clear picture, especially the image of your son who is already wounded. And so that is a powerful, powerful change of words, as you saw. When I think about having just talked to your wife, when I think about what I've seen in education over, I used to say over the last 10 years, and now I can even say over the last 3 years, and that increase in wounded students that we're getting. And I can really kind of, for good or bad, see why educators are jumping off the education boat, because they think they're going into it for academics when teachers are spending so much of their day with wounded students who are acting wounded. Mm-hmm. They're acting wounded, and that behavior is taking up a lot of energy from our educators. And I can imagine, I have a lot of family that has foster children, and I know that they deal with wounded also. And if you don't know what to do with that, do you see that as part of the problem with people leaving education, is they don't know what to do with the wounded?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll just use myself as an example, and the things I'm just saying are just true of me. It may not be true of you, may not be true of anybody you guys even know. may not be true of anybody in your audience. These are things that are just true of me. You know, I was talking about wounded kids and presenting at conferences, and I thought I had some knowledge because I was doing some studying of it. And we had got a call for our first foster child, and my wife asked me if I was sitting down because they told us the needs was teenage boys. And so she says, we got a call for our first foster child. And I said, well, how old is he and where's he at? And she said, it's not a he, it's a she. It's a little girl. She's 5 weeks premature, 4 pounds, and is homeless. She says, what do you think? I said, I think you're halfway to that hospital. And she said, you're right. I'm in the car. I'm halfway to the hospital. And you met Darty. You can imagine that.
Yeah.
And she was with her best friend. And so I had to shift this thing. And I'm going to use my story because it shows, even though I was talking about wounded kids and I was changing my paradigm shift from at risk to wounded, I really still had a judgment card against wounded kids subconsciously. And I would say things like this, maybe subconsciously, I would say things like, you know, maybe if this kid chose better friends, they wouldn't be wounded. Maybe if they had a better family, they wouldn't be wounded. Maybe if they had a better community, they wouldn't be wounded. You know, I just had this judgment card about wounded kids, you know, and trying to fix it and control it, you know. And it doesn't really need fixed or controlled. It needs healed. And I think our country and what we're dealing with now doesn't need fixed. I mean, fix and control, yes, there's a limit to that. But I think there's a space where it eventually needs healed. But my wife brought our daughter home, foster daughter at the time, and I held this 4 pound, 5 week premature little girl in my hand. 4 pounds will fit in one hand, by the way. And when I held my daughter, foster daughter, in my hand, now our daughter, in my hand for the first time, it changed everything that I've talked to you today about. It changed my whole paradigm shift on wounded kids. I didn't learn it in my EDD work. I didn't learn it in the classroom. I didn't learn it. I learned from this 4 pound, 5 week premature little girl. When I looked at her, she said, not verbally, but spoke to me, said, Dad, some kids just come into the world wounded. And I never thought of that. And then I thought, you know, Joe, if woundedness was a choice, which one of our kids is choosing woundedness? And who would choose woundedness? Who would choose abuse? Who would choose neglect? Who would choose homelessness? Who would choose poverty? Not just because it comes from poverty doesn't guarantee woundedness, just because you come from a single parent home doesn't guarantee woundedness. But the big indicators thereof, so we want to pay attention to it. But my daughter taught me, if I kind of said to me, Dad, if you're going to work with wounded kids, you have to put the judgment card away. And you have to empathize with us. And if you can't empathize with us, you have to at least be compassionate to our story. And so that's kind of the way, and that's kind of the way it worked with a child. Now, when I went to my staff for the first time, I asked Joe, who was a military Marine sergeant, was on my staff, what they thought of this topic of wounded. And he said, I like what you're saying, and here's why. He said, because you're allowing me to be a good warrior again. You're allowing me to be a good soldier again, because a good warrior and a good soldier never leaves anyone in the battlefield wounded. And he says, I think you're telling us to quit kicking kids out of school in record numbers. And I think you're telling us to go out and find the kids in the community and in the streets that we've lost and bring them back. He said, but I'm going to teach you something about battle you don't understand. This is a battle. He said, some of them are going to just say, leave me here. But a responsible warrior brings them home, brings them back anyways to safety. And counselors taught me that healing takes place in safe place. Now, our job as educators isn't to heal kids, but as educators, we can create safe place, right? And it does help with healing. So there's things we can do in the classroom and in our schools and in our cultures that create safe place. So that's kind of so Joe taught us to be warriors of hope for these children, these broken and lost children. We call them wounded kids, whatever you want to call but they're beyond that risk. I did the National Youth at Risk Conference in front of 1,500 people, and I said, I'm not going to talk about at-risk kids. I'm going to talk about wounded kids, kids beyond that risk. It was just a paradigm shift. And again, I don't want anybody to, any of your audience members to think Joe wants this at-risk program thrown out of our school or the term. No. We need to keep that for at-risk kids, because there's kids that are at risk of falling behind grade level wise, not graduating on time. Something could potentially happen to them. We want to prevent that. And those programs are good for those kids. But we've got so many, the numbers are clear. The research is clear that, and another thing I ask when I go out, I ask each school, how many of you feel like your kids are wounded in some way, whether they're at risk and wounded or just wounded? And it's usually in the 90s, low 90s, feel that their kids have been wounded in some way. And our colleges need to recognize that to prepare our next generation of teachers, to how to deal with, and I say position our kids to experience empathic connections with one another. Not teach empathy, but teach it and position them to experience empathic connections with one another and reconnect them with one another, because the things we see going on are indifference. And somehow we've got to get our kids to know each other so they're not indifferent to one another.
That's a powerful statement. That is powerful.
It goes beyond hate. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know that I have anything. Hate's an emotion. It's wrong. It's terrible. It's unacceptable. There's nothing good about it. It's wrong. But it's an emotion. Indifference is, and correct me if I'm wrong, indifference, there's no emotion involved.
And that is exactly what we are seeing in the schools today, is that just indifference that they're not able to feel, or we're losing that empathy for each other and really seeing each other. And I just feel like that's another, I that was powerful to hear. And I feel like that's another podcast. I want to explore that and think about that. But I tell you, there was so much. Laura, did I not tell you this was powerful?
You did. You came back from Savannah talking about these two and how you had met them, and just that I would be blown away, and you were correct.
So we are asking our listeners to go to hopeforthewounded.org, and there's more information, and you can find out from there, I'm sure, how you can get Joe or Darty to come help your school, or the books that they have. I think that's a great place to start, is just to pick up, and all that's online there. So Dr. Hendershott, I cannot thank you enough for the work you're doing. I feel like this is, as I told your wife, more than a job. It is a ministry and it's a mission, and you're living it. And it's just an honor for you to have been on with us today. Thank you so very much.
Actually, it's been my honor, because you've given a platform that needs to be talked about. And you guys are doing the work and getting the message out there. And I honor the work that you're doing. And I honor our teachers and our administrators and our superintendents and our support staff that are out there working with these kids. And that's why I do what I do, just to honor the work that they're doing.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Well, you were right. Once again, you were right. He definitely has a gift for reframing what we think we know and changing it to shed new light on it. And I think as he was talking, all I could think about was training the teachers, because we as school counselors, a lot of times we get this. And this was just, like you said, a fresh word. It was a fresh way to look at what we already know, because I feel like counselors have that compassionate heart. But I think sometimes people can get calloused in just and especially right now there are so many wounded, there are so many wounds that we can become calloused and complacent. And I think that going into this next year, I know it's summer right now, but I'm already thinking about next year, we can become, and our teachers can become I keep saying the word saturated with SEL and with PBIS and with MTSS and all the things.
Yeah.
This gives the why behind what we're doing to help these students.
And for me, I think, and it hit me just as strongly as it did when I was in person hearing him, that a lot of just that change, reframing student at risk, they're already wounded.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we do as school counselors is preventive.
Yeah.
And that's important, as he said. That's important. There are students at risk of failing. There are students at risk of, poverty, at risk of hunger, at risk of different things. But and I think just addressing that somehow makes me, I think it's powerful. And that as a school counselor, a lot of what we're having to deal with is not at risk. It's already happened. And now these teachers are, how do I teach this wounded child? As a school counselor, how can I support this wounded child? Because we're past at risk.
Yeah.
And I guess just that paradigm shift of saying we're past at risk. We are already wounded. And I think the other big thing for me was that what you were talking about, that piece of empathy that we can sometimes lose, is when he looked at that premature baby that what he would end up adopting and said, it's some children come in the world wounded. And if they had a choice, they wouldn't choose to be wounded.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so powerful if we look at it that way. And and I just think we're seeing more and more wounded. And so what do we do with that? And so anyway, I'm looking forward to digging into their books, Hope for the Wounded, one for educators who are wounded, because we deal with a lot of trauma, secondhand trauma, and a lot of trauma that we've experienced over the last 2 or 3 years that we didn't think would have to face. So I think it's,
One thing he said after we stopped recording was that the book goes into detail about the 5 different types of wounds and what to do with those. So I think that is something, I think you definitely want to get his book. I know you have it, but I will be ordering it. And I think our listeners, that would be very helpful to see what the 5 different types of wounds he's going to talk about. And then we always love the takeaways of what do you do next. So I will be ordering that book.
Yes. I think that's exciting. And this might be one that as you go back to your school year and you're introducing your program for the year, and you're talking to your educators that we're going to be working with this year, that may be where you want to shift that paradigm. That may be that fresh word that you want to give them. Hey, these aren't kids at risk. These are kids that are already wounded. And maybe share the story that he shares about his child in the back seat of the car. And it was, you're not dealing with an at risk of being hurt child. The child's already wounded.
Right.
And so that's where you have to get them where they need to go. And as counselors, a lot of what we do is getting them where they need to go. Yeah. And it's not us, it's it's other mental health professionals or different people. So a lot there.
You mentioned doing a book study with your staff on this book, and I thought that was a great idea. So I wanted our listeners to hear that might be something that you all would want to do as well, a book study on this.
Absolutely. Okay.
All right. Well, we have a very busy summer, and we just wanted to pass some of these opportunities along to our listeners. Some things, the registration may have already passed, but some things are still open. One of those is the Keep Indiana Learning Conference. It is next, well, I don't know when you're listening to this, and it's actually not next week. Well, no, maybe it is. I don't know. I've lost track.
You have no.
It's summer, and I don't even know what day it is.
Point.
But it's June 14th and 15th. So you can register for that conference, and then you have all year to watch the sessions. So go sign up for that. We're doing 3 sessions at that Indiana conference. The second thing that I wanted to mention, and this is for our Alabama high school counselors. So if you are not an Alabama high school counselor, you can stop listening, or you can continue listening and be jealous of the Alabama high school counselors that get to spend some time with us.
Or they can reach out to us, and we can hook them up with a representative from their state. How about that, Laura? How about
That
being
works.
more professional than catty?
Okay, true. But we have the CSPD week, and that is Computer Science Professional Development Week. And we're going to be talking about how school counselors are absolutely essential and instrumental in spreading the word of CS, Computer Science for All. You know, we are the computer science. If you guys know Jeff Gray from the University of Alabama, if you've ever heard him speak, he talks about how computer science is a family tree changer. And I think that statement, if you ever get to hear him speak, it's so powerful, because computer science has opened doors for people and changed the family tree cycle for so many students and given them opportunities that they never would have had before. So we're very passionate about this topic, and we have the opportunity to go to Tuscaloosa June 27th through the 29th. So check that out. That is on our Instagram. And if you want more information about that, then send us a message. Now, Kim, I will remind you that this is the same conference that we got thrown off the golf course last year.
I remember. Yes.
And
I
it's
do
not because we were
remember.
playing golf. We
made that golf course our own. Our own little beautiful walking trail, and that
Well,
obviously is a no-no.
I just got the opportunity to tell someone that story the other day, and it is still just as funny today as it was a year ago because of how stupid we are.
I thought they were waving and like, hi,
I was
it was
like, people
actually
are so
four.
friendly. Like,
I was like, 4 to you, 4 to you.
and a good 4 to you as well.
Happy 4 to you. Happy. So anyway, we have learned a valuable lesson, and I want our listeners to be aware that walking on a golf course is obviously dangerous.
It is dangerous. Don't do it. We don't advise it. Let's tell about one more event that we'll be doing this summer, and then we'll save the rest for another episode.
Yes, let's tell, because that's the only way I know is if you tell me.
That's exactly why we're doing this. Everybody else can stop listening. I'm just trying to let Kim know where we need to be when. But we are going to be at the ASCA conference in Austin. So we would love to, we'd love it if you'd come say hi to us. That was the highlight of our year. Well, we had many highlights at the ASCA conference last year, but one of those highlights was getting to meet so many of you. So we have a session on school counselor hacks. Look for it and attend it. We are going to have so much fun in that session.
We are. I'm excited about this session. We've done a lot of meaty, is that a word? Meaty sessions. And this one is not as meaty, but it's needy.
Oh, it is going to be so much fun. And
It is fun. It is fun. And I think it's going to be a time saver, which is important.
It is. All right. Well,
I can't stop eating graham peppers. And
I know you're embarrassing me. Okay. Follow us on Instagram. Like us. Lump us is what you said last week. And I'm going to stand by that. Like us or lump us. And have a good week.